Welcome back to Truck and Talk, where we bring you conversations with the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of transportation. Innovation has never moved faster than it does today. Every year brings new technologies, new ideas, and new promises about what will transform transportation. Electric trucks, alternative fuels, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems. The possibilities seem endless. But amid all that innovation, one question matters more than any other. How do we know what actually works? Today's guest has spent his career answering that question. Joining us is Daryl Bear, the co-owner of MVT Solutions. Through engineering, testing, and data-driven analysis, Daryl and his team help fleets evaluate technologies using measurable results instead of assumptions. Daryl, welcome back to Truck and Talk.
Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, before we get into our conversation, we have a segment called Fuel for Thought. And we want to talk today about the trucking industry never having more options than it does today. We're talking about electric trucks, hybrid systems, alternative fuels, aerodynamic devices, new tire technologies, artificial intelligence, and countless products that all promise to improve efficiency. So, innovation only matters, though, if it delivers real results. So, we're talking about how fleets can separate promising ideas from proven solutions and what the future of trucking might actually look like. So, with all that said, when you hear people talking about the future of trucking, what do you think they're getting right? And where do you think there is still a disconnect between perception and reality?
That's a good question because the reality is, in my opinion anyways, trucking is such a complicated industry. And what trucking fleets do is amazing to have their workforce spread across the country doing sometimes millions of miles a day. And so the reality is that they're delivering goods that we all depend on. That's their reality. And the perception of a lot of things is that, from the vendor standpoint, that their technologies all work. And then, of course, from the fleet standpoint, they're trying to figure out what does actually work. But there is a lot of data now. We're kind of overrun by data as an industry, but the key is really to get reliable data. It's being able to get it all down to where you can see tangible answers and proper measurements and know what you're looking at is real.
So, as I alluded to, technology is evolving and it's evolving very quickly. How important is it for fleets to focus on measurable results instead of simply following the newest trend?
Yeah, more important than ever. Yeah, it's there are so many trends. It's really quite overwhelming. The hype with technologies is definitely bigger than the reality, in my opinion, anyways. We've been doing some stuff with electric vehicles recently, and that's been the hype for sort of 5 years. And while all that's been going on, people have been ignoring what's really under their noses, the fuel savings that they can capture with the equipment that they have now. So, of course, there's EVs, but now it's AI. That's the next thing that's going to save the world and all of our problems. So it's kind of interesting seeing that play out. But really, trucking organizations are they're very realistic. Like they know that where the rubber meets the road is where things start to make sense. So they tend to be very good about seeing what actually works. Measuring it is a different story. That's where technology is really going to take off.
Mm-hmm. So, before we talk more about where the industry is headed, Daryl, I'd love to start with your own story. Your career began in race engineering, and that's where precision can be the difference between winning and losing, and often by fractions of seconds. So, how did that journey eventually lead you into commercial trucking?
Yeah, definitely. Racing is very much about precision and very small answers. But even in racing, you can get to a 1% margin of error in terms of the accuracy of the data and make a decision, because you have driver feedback and you have lap times and things like that. But in fuel economy, it's even more precise, which made it really difficult. But it was really understanding the vehicle and the data that went into it and making decisions, plus my time as a test engineer before that with full vehicles, that kind of evolved into the fuel economy side. But it actually started, when I started doing this, I met Jimmy Ray, Royal's business partner from MVT, and we started talking about fuel economy. And what he explained to me was that it wasn't so hard to find fuel savings, it was hard to measure it. And that's what really struck me. And I kind of went home and started working on things and developing some test methods and finding answers, and it just sort of evolved into me coming back to El Paso and meeting with Jimmy, and then we started doing fuel economy testing.
Mm. So when you first entered the trucking industry, what surprised you the most?
Yeah, a lot of things. I was surprised that there were a lot of products on the market that people weren't using. And again, meeting Jimmy and meeting Royal as well, I saw that as MVT as a fleet was using a lot of things that other people weren't. And so they obviously knew some things other people didn't. But, we tested a lot of things in the beginning. Even in the first year, we did about 100 tests together and saw a lot of fuel savings. But what's really surprised me since then is how reluctant the industry's been to believe what works. But the more time you spend in the industry, you realize why, because there's so much false information. So it surprised me how long it's taken to help people, understand the truth, but it's just the way it is.
Can you give us an example of maybe some of the false information that these companies were buying into that are not true?
Well, there were some technologies we tested that were approved by, the government agencies that approve or verify them, and things that we tested that either didn't work at all or the savings were only a fraction of what they were advertised as. And some of those ended up in federal lawsuits. Like they were big cases, but there are just a lot of things where anybody can make a claim. It's a matter of having accurate measurements that you can stand behind. So there's just been a lot of examples of those. And the other side of it is, it's one thing measuring something in a test environment. It's another thing what happens when it's on the road in a real world environment. And every fleet's real world is a little bit different.
Mhm. So is there something that you immediately recognized that made you think that there was an opportunity to improve how technologies were being evaluated?
Yeah, really. Like when I first started doing testing, I wasn't getting very consistent answers either. So at first it was discouraging, but then I realized, well, that's what everyone else is experiencing, so I must be on the right path,
Mm.
which was kind of a weird way to think, but I just kept getting more data and more sensors and analyzing things, and I started to get more answers and refine a method and the way that measurements were being made and calculations, and things started to come together. And then one day I just realized that you couldn't measure as a percent. There were some things going on that the math just didn't work out, and that's when I started using what's called the energy method. And then things got a lot more straightforward. And since then it's been a lot more clear.
Hmm. So you once said that accurately measuring fuel economy can actually be harder than improving it. Why has measuring performance consistently been such a challenge for the industry?
There's so many variables involved in a number. So you can get in a vehicle, whether it's a car or a truck, and drive it down the road. And if you had sensors on it that were measuring the fuel consumption by the second, you would see that it's constantly going up and down because, the road changes, there's traffic going in and out, the wind is constantly changing. And so as that goes up and down, if you're trying to measure something that's, 1%, it's going up and down with it. So it's like, I compare it to, if you were to measure the length of a hair, you could do that with a tape measure. But if you tried to measure the thickness of a hair, a tape measure wouldn't be good enough. So really, you need much more accurate tools and the ability to measure the variables if you want to measure the difference in a fuel savings.
One thing that stands out about MVT Solutions is that the goal isn't to prove a product right or wrong, it's to uncover the truth through testing. So, why has maintaining that objectivity been so important throughout your career?
Well, yeah, it's one thing to give an answer to anybody. It's another thing to be able to prove it so that they understand it and they trust it. In racing, that was a big thing. If when you're at the racetrack, if it's you're doing 95 miles an hour, well, I'm not, the driver is, but you obviously don't want them to crash. If you just make a change and they go out and then crash the car because they didn't understand what the change was, it's my fault. But if you're going to make the change and you explain to them why and what it's going to do and what to watch out for, like it would be very common to have what's called understeer, where you go into a corner and the car isn't turning as well as you want. So you would lower the front of the car, which makes it turn faster and gives it more aero. But if you don't tell them that, and then they go in and they turn the same way, the car will spin fast, and then they go into the wall or they hit another car or whatever it might be. So, you have to let them know what's happening with the car. And with trucking and fuel economy, it's the same thing. You look at the technology, you look at the testing, you go over the data, you show people the numbers, you explain why. And sometimes you explain, we're not seeing the numbers we thought we were. We have to go test again, and that's on us. But the end result is getting a good answer.
Hmm. MVT Solutions has evaluated an incredible range of technologies from aerodynamics in tires to lubricants, alternative fuels, and electric vehicles. So, looking back, which accomplishment makes you most proud because it truly changed how fleets evaluate technology?
It's very I don't know if proud is the right word, but it's definitely satisfying to see fleets that you've worked with adopting things and getting fuel savings from it, and obviously using less fuel, helping the environment, and to see it catching on. We've now worked with I think 15 of the Transport Topics top 100 fleets. So there's a lot of fleets. It's a big number. So there is some influence that's increasing, and that's really the big thing. It's not like a specific technology, I would say, as much as the knowledge getting out there.
Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs don't come from a revolutionary new product, but from a better understanding of existing ones. Do you think that we've entered an era where data has become just as valuable as the technology itself?
Yeah, as much or maybe more. The data is very important, but there's so much of it. It's like I was saying earlier. It's really about taking the data and getting a reliable answer out of it. It's being able to sift through it all, sift through the noise and get to something valuable. And it's we have this world now where people think the more data, the better, and that they can just sit in a desk and crunch it and get an answer. But especially with vehicles, you just can't do that. Like you have to understand how it's working, and they're so intricate. There's so many weird things going on with vehicles. And I was thinking recently we did a test a number of years ago with MVT, and the whole crew was at the test track, and we had a truck that really wasn't working right, and you could see in the data there'd be steps in it, and like you'd go out, it'd be like 1% off, the next time 2% off, next time it was fine. It was just really weird, and we couldn't figure out why. We parked the truck, continued testing with the other one, and went back to the shop, and Shane, he changed the after treatment system. It was an issue at the time with a lot of trucks. We went back to the track, had the same issue, and what ended up happening is what Alan Derringer had noticed, that the fan was running.
Mm.
And MVT uses these 6-speed fans, and they turn on, and they're very quiet at the beginning. So that they're just, a little bit of noise, and he heard it, I guess, but it's just little things like that. And if you didn't know that was happening or didn't have the accuracy to catch that in the data, then we would have made the wrong choice with any kind of products.
Electric vehicles have become one of the biggest conversations in transportation. Through everything that you have tested, what is the biggest misconception that people still have about electrifying commercial trucking?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have learned the hard way about the realities of electric trucks. Um, they're a great machine, but the amount of energy they use is massive. So an average house in the U.S. uses about 30 kilowatt hours of energy a day, electricity. You want to guess how far a truck will go on that much energy?
How far?
About 15 miles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not very far.
Okay.
So the amount of energy a truck uses in a day is just massive, and that's why diesel is such a good fuel. But obviously, then it puts pollution into the air. So the real issue with electric vehicles is being able to provide the power. And it's one thing to install you know, another trucking company to set up shop, and you can tanker in fuel to them and you can deliver trucks, but you can't just deliver electricity. You need facilities to make the electricity, you need the power lines to get it there. So it's a very complex process. But there are a lot of very good uses for them, which are more the shorter range routes, like the last mile delivery and any kind of stop and go. So when we recently did some electric testing, the the diesel truck in El Paso, it didn't get as good a fuel mileage as it did on the highway, which is, you know, expected. But the electric truck got better economy, call it, in El Paso because it had the stop and go and things like that.
So there's often a lot of pressure to ask whether electric trucks will ever replace diesel trucks. Do you see that ever happening, or is this just not the right conversation to have because, like you alluded to, it's really at this point just about making sure you're using the right technology where best used?
It's really about the duty cycle where it fits. Yeah, the last mile delivery stuff is a very good fit, and a lot of fleets that we work with have smaller vehicles where they're doing deliveries like that, delivering, a lot of food or beverages and things like that. They're really great for that, really great fit. But for longer distances where you need a lot of fuel, a lot of energy in a day, they're just not quite there yet. And the Tesla trucks seem to have a pretty good range, but again, you still have to get the electricity for them.
And I think you said it in your answer, not there yet. Do you anticipate that eventually it will get to that point where it's doing longer distance?
The technology is certainly gonna get better and, definitely get more range. The funny thing is that to get better range, the vehicle themselves, they have to be more efficient, and the industry's kinda skipped that. They went MVT is kind of its own thing where they've done so much with making the vehicle more efficient with the tires and lubricants and aerodynamics and engine parameters. So they're on top of that. So it'd be a lot easier for them to electrify with a more efficient fleet than it would for someone else that hasn't worked on it yet.
Hmm. So commercial trucking is far more complex than passenger transportation. What are some of the operational realities that people outside the industry often overlook?
Mm. Yeah, trucking is so complicated. I couldn't even begin to answer, honestly. It's way beyond my scope. It's funny that, I've been doing this for, 10 or 12 years, I guess, and you learn something new every day because there's just so many factors that play into everything. A normal person that isn't familiar with trucking couldn't possibly understand it. The same way, like, I couldn't understand what goes on in the surgery or in an operating room, I mean, you can watch it on TV, but it's just not the same, I'm sure, and blood's kinda gross, but, um yeah, so I don't know how else to answer it. I think we just have to have a lot of respect for the trucking industry for everything that it does for all of us.
And so, I mean, maybe just to pin you down a bit, like, is there just one thing that you could think of that would make it, just one example of a reality that people might overlook?
People don't realize how I would say I'll talk about the safety side of it. People don't realize how much energy is in a truck that's rolling down the road. So anyone that's in a passenger vehicle, there are signs around that says to give trucks room, and my goodness, you never wanna find out why. Like, I would say that's the most useful piece of information I could give, to keep a safe distance with trucks because there's a lot of energy there, it's hard to slow them down.
Mm-hmm. So, if a fleet executive came to you and said, "We're evaluating a new technology," what is the very first question that you would encourage them to ask before making that investment?
Well, kinda like the industry's complicated, every fleet's complicated as well, and so I would ask them to talk to us first
Mm.
and have a one-hour conversation and really talk about their company and what their goals are, where they operate, their successes, their failures. Because to really help anybody, you really have to understand where they're coming from and how they operate.
Has there ever been a technology that everyone expected to perform well, but once you tested it, the data told a completely different story?
It depends who's telling the story. Yeah, every product vendor, they believe, very solidly in their product, and their claims are usually very exaggerated. And I shouldn't say exaggerated, they believe them, but it's because of the way that they measured or they kind of handpicked the best results. So, in terms of things that have surprised us, not really. One of them, I guess I would say, is actually axle lubricants. We've done a lot of those for BASF, and you wouldn't think that an axle oil would help fuel economy much, but it's actually a very significant savings for something that hardly costs anything to install.
And on the other hand, has there been a technology that exceeded expectations and then genuinely changed the way that you think about the future?
Really, I think it's the process more than anything. There are a lot of technologies. In terms of with efficiency and fuel economy, it's not one single thing that solves all the problems. It's a series of things and installations and specs that you can do. So it really comes down to the measurements and picking the right products for a fleet and the right packages.
Mhm. One thing that comes across in your work is that engineering alone is not enough. You also have to explain the findings in a way that decision makers can actually use. Has teaching become just as important as testing?
Yeah. Yeah, and learning is as well. I was saying about if we talk to a fleet, we ask a lot of questions because we really need to understand their situation. So it's as much about learning from them as it is us teaching them. So, we're considered the experts on fuel economy, but if we're working with the fleet, they're the experts in the fleet, and we can't replace that. So it's really about the teamwork.
So you're preparing to release your fuel economy book this year. So after years of testing and research, challenging conventional thinking, what made you decide that now is the right time to put everything that you've learned into a book?
It wasn't so much a decision as we had some time to do it, and it was sort of an intersection of having the time and getting the information collected, and just having a team that we could work on it with. And and honestly, I think the industry is ready for it as well. It's when I first started doing this, everyone was very much caught up in the industry standard methods, and that's kind of gone away. They've learned sort of over the last several years that those methods aren't working for people. So I think they're ready to understand why. And we have enough experience as well now, and backing behind us that people I think will listen more. So it was just time.
So who's your intended audience for the book?
Fleets, definitely it's geared toward fleets. It's all about helping them understand fuel economy, and there's a science with it, and the reasons why. And there are really two ways. And at MVT Solutions, we have a quarterly roundtable that we do with a number of fleets that we communicate with on a regular basis. And so I asked them, we're writing this book, and can you give us some input on what you'd like to see? And I said, think of it two ways. Like the first thing is, you're hiring someone that's very new to trucking. You put this book on their desk, you want them to understand fuel economy. What do you want in that book? And then the second one was, what do you guys want to see? You're the experts in the field. You've been working on it a long time. And so it was a combination of both things, really.
Obviously, we want people to buy your book, but if there is one lesson that people can take from the book and remember 5 years from now, what would you want that lesson to be?
Oh, I don't expect to make any money or even sell the book, honestly.
Okay.
Um, I don't think anyone would buy it.
I don't know if that's good marketing.
That's okay. It's not about the marketing. It's really about the education. Like
Mhm.
I really want people to. I'll tell you the real reason why I wrote it. It's when I first met Jimmy Ray, it was in 2011, and I met him at TMC, the annual show, and a bunch of vendors. And it really tore me up how hard they were working on this stuff, but they weren't getting anywhere. Jimmy told me how hard it was to test, how hard it was to get answers. They test day after day, get different answers. And and he had a few other words for it. And then the vendors, they would have all these claims and say our product is this and this and this. And then I would go to the next booth and they'd say the exact same thing. And then they go, oh, by the way, that those people you were just talking to, their stuff doesn't work. You're like, oh, okay. And that just kept happening.
Mhm.
And I really it really gave me kind of a pain in my stomach. Like it really, really bothered me. So the real reason I really wanted to write this book was to kind of take care of that, was to say, okay, look, there's a reason why all these answers have been misunderstood. Why? Because people have been ignoring the science. They don't understand how things work. And here's the science of it. Here it is in layman's terms and some proof and some stories. And that's really the reason. And I don't know. We live in an age where you teach people how to do stuff, where you explain stuff, and it just kind of works out. I don't know. So I'm just having some faith in that.
Mhm. Technology continues to evolve rapidly. So looking ahead, what developments genuinely excite you and which ones do you think that the industry may be overestimating?
Yeah, I don't know that they're overestimating too much. It's really just the hype. But what excites me really is, like I said, I think we're getting to a point where people are finally ready to listen to more reality than the hype. And it's taken a long time for us to get to a point where people will listen to, sort of our experience and things like that. But that's what excites me, quite honestly.
Artificial intelligence is becoming a reality in every industry. So, where do you see AI creating real value in trucking? And where do you think that human expertise will remain essential?
Oh gosh, trucking is, like I said, so complicated. Um, I think we underestimate how important expertise is on the person level, to the people level. And I see Royal quite often in the mornings, and Alan Derringer and some other MVT people, and the amount of knowledge they have. In fact, the test we were doing last week with a major fleet, Alan was doing some driving for us, and the fleet had a bunch of questions they were asking me, and I said, "You need to go take a ride with Alan." And they're like, "Oh, why is that?" I said, "He's an encyclopedia. Just go do a couple laps with him and you'll see. Just ask him all your questions." And the fleet guy got out of the truck. He goes, "Holy cow, you're not kidding. He really is an encyclopedia." And he's been working on this forever, and you just can't replace that with AI. I mean, AI is a great tool, but it's not going to solve every problem.
Hmm. Throughout your career, you've spent a lot of time proving or disproving ideas with data. Has there ever been a test that completely changed your own perspective or made you rethink something that you were convinced would work?
Not really. I'm never really convinced something would or wouldn't work. It's a test,
Hmm.
and when something doesn't work as you expect, you look at it, and it's only a test of that condition. So it could very well work in a different condition. It was the same in racing. It's the same anywhere, right? So it's not as much yeah, not as much like a breakthrough thing. At least not to me anyways, because I've worked on vehicles so much, but to other people maybe.
The trucking industry has no shortage of innovation, but not every innovation creates lasting value. In your opinion, what separates technology that truly changes the industry from technology that is simply a trend?
I guess how long it's around.
Mm.
I don't know. Sorry, I get kind of tired of the hype. I think it gets too much attention compared to what's real in this industry. It's got really bad, I think. Like I said, I felt really bad for trucking fleets that got really deep into the electric vehicle side of things. They spent millions of dollars and more time trying to deal with utilities than doing trucking.
Mm.
And and I look at something and see how easy it is to improve fuel economy by 1%. And if a fleet does that, okay, well, that's 1% less fuel. If they couldn't possibly adopt 1% electric vehicles, there's just not enough capacity to do that. So, you could change an engine oil or mud flaps and do way more for the environment and the pocketbook than you could going down the EV route. So I think there's a lot of hype there. Not that there's anything against EVs. It's just, making intelligent decisions with the right data, I guess you could say.
If you had unlimited resources to research a challenge that's facing the trucking industry today, what problem would you dedicate your team to solving?
We would put in place an education program on efficiency, strictly on efficiency. Basically, I thought about this, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but if it was fuel economy U, we would just call it FU. And then, if someone was like, they were going to go to this course, and they want, the boss is like, "Where are you going next week?" And they just said FU. You just thought it'd be really funny. So that's good marketing. But really, it's the difference is in education. I really think that we need to educate people on how to be more efficient in terms of how they operate the equipment.
Mhm. When you look 10 years into the future, what do you hope will have changed about the way fleets evaluate technology?
It's kind of like the education side. I hope people are more informed and more understanding of the science and the reality of it. When I first started working in racing, I remember reading this article. It was said the black art of dampers, which are shocks.
Mhm.
And if you look back at it now, it's so outdated because like it's fluid in a mechanical thing. It's very predictable now that we have all the math and the computing to do it. So I would hope that we evolve to where the sort of this black art or black science is fixed.
Speaking of evolution, imagine 20 years from now, someone is learning about MVT Solutions for the first time. What do you hope that they say that your company contributed to the trucking industry?
I just hope that they think that we help the industry be more efficient and make smarter decisions and progress to where right now there's a lot of technologies, but the bottleneck is being able to measure them and for people to implement them. So I hope the two sides catch up.
And you've spent your career asking, how do we know this works? So if someone listening to this conversation walks away remembering just one piece of advice about evaluating new technology, what would you want that takeaway to be?
It's honestly not a simple answer, and that's why we put this book together. as well as another reason. What I would want to see people do is go to our website and subscribe to the mailing list or follow us on LinkedIn, and they would just continually learn more things that we're sending out because it's really a process. It's like anything. Like if if you go to school, you don't learn everything in the first week. You're there for a while, and there's a lot of courses and tests and sometimes some failures. Um, but that would be it.
Okay. Well, Daryl, thank you again for sharing your perspective with us today. This conversation has made clear that meaningful innovation isn't about chasing every new idea. It's just about asking better questions, testing with integrity, and making decisions backed by evidence and data. And thank you again for your work that you continue to do for this industry.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here with you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Truck and Talk. It's been a privilege sharing these conversations and highlighting the people whose leadership, innovation, and dedication continue to move our industry forward. From all of us, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of the Truck and Talk journey. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep on trucking.